I opened my eyes that morning to the jarring realization that I had been betrayed. My closest confidant, the one I believed I could trust, had sold me out for a handful of ill-gotten gains. The sting of that revelation cut deeper than any physical wound, slicing through my resolve and leaving me to question everything I had built. As I sat up, the room still dim from the dawn's first light, I felt the weight of it settle on my chest, heavy as an anchor, dragging me into a sea of doubt. That moment, more than any other, underscored the brutal truth. Trust is a fragile illusion, and betrayal is the harshest reminder of how easily it shatters. Later that day, I found myself face to face with him, the man who had sought me out, cloaked in a veneer of remorse and desperation. His name was Marcus, a politician whose reputation was stained with greed and corruption. He'd come through my door like a shadow, eyes darting around as if the walls themselves might betray him. I studied him carefully, noting the tremor in his voice as he finally spoke. "Doctor, I've heard you're the best at what you do. I need help," he whispered, voice trembling. His hands fidgeted in his lap, betraying the false bravado he tried to maintain. I kept my expression neutral, my mind already piecing together his story. "Help with what? Your reputation?" I asked, voice even but piercing like a scalpel. His jaw clenched, but he nodded. I've made mistakes. I want to change. I'm willing to do anything." His words dripped with desperation, yet beneath that was a stubborn flicker of pride that refused to admit defeat. "Anything?" I echoed, leaning forward enough to see the sweat bead on his forehead. "Because the truth is, Marcus, your salvation isn't found in half measures or superficial apologies. It's in confronting what you've truly done." He looked away, visibly uncomfortable, but I pressed on. "Tell me, what's the one thing that could free you, truly free you?" He hesitated, then blurted out, "I need to atone. I want to make amends, pay back what I've stolen, fix what I've broken." His voice cracked under the weight of his own words. I studied him for a long moment, then leaned back, steepling my fingers. "What if I told you that your salvation isn't about paying back, because that's only a bandage on a wound that runs too deep? What if I told you that the only true cure for your soul is to relinquish everything, to let go of your greed completely?" He looked at me, confusion and doubt swirling in his eyes. "You mean, give away my money?" "Not just give away, Marcus. Don't just donate a fraction of what you've stolen. Burn it, destroy it. Set yourself free from the shackles of wealth that have chained you to corruption." I saw a flicker of disbelief, then something darker. Hope, perhaps, or panic. He shook his head violently. "You're asking me to wipe out my entire fortune?" "Yes," I said firmly, "because only then will you understand what true repentance really means. To confront your demons, you must strip yourself of everything that sustains them." His breathing quickened, and I saw the first signs of a crack in his armor. "That's impossible. My entire life—" "Your life as you knew it was built on lies and greed," I interrupted. "If you want real change, if you want to heal, you must confront the darkness head-on. Only then can you begin to rebuild your soul." He stared at his trembling hands, then looked up, eyes glistening with tears, or perhaps a mixture of shame and hope. "And if I do this?" "You'll be reborn," I whispered. "A man truly free." I paused, my voice lowering to a near whisper. "But know this. It will be the hardest thing you've ever done. It will cost you everything. Are you prepared for that?" He hesitated, then nodded slowly, a faint glimmer of resolve flickering in his eyes. "I am." I reached into my bag and pulled out a blank check, a pen trembling in my hand. As I handed it to him, I looked straight into his eyes. "Then sign this. Empty your accounts. Give everything away, because that's the only cure I can prescribe, one that will set your soul free or condemn you forever." He took the pen with a trembling hand, pausing as if weighing the gravity of what he was about to do. Then, with a deep breath, he signed. The ink scrawled across the paper like a declaration of war against his past. As he looked up, realization dawned in his eyes. I knew that this act, this sacrificial offering, would forever change him. I had finally broken through the facade, forced him to see that true redemption only exists in absolute surrender. And in that moment, I felt a strange sense of relief, knowing I had guided him to that precipice, that he was one step closer to salvation or damnation, depending on what he chose next. I sit silently in my office, the dim light casting shadows that seem to pulse with the urgency of this moment. The door opens slowly, and in steps a man whose presence immediately commands attention, yet beneath that veneer I see the cracks, nervous flickers in his eyes, trembling hands that betray his composed exterior. He is a politician, I know, but today he looks more like a man trying to hold together a fragile illusion, a man haunted by secrets he cannot keep hidden. He approaches hesitantly, as if every step is weighed down by the invisible burden of guilt, or perhaps fear of exposure. His posture tells me he's used to controlling narratives, commanding power, but here in this room, he is vulnerable. I observe the way his shoulders tighten, the way his eyes dart around seeking an escape route that doesn't exist. I recognize that struggle, the internal war between denial and acknowledgement. I gesture to the chair across from me, and he sinks into it, shoulders hunched, eyes scanning the walls as if searching for some unseen exit. I let the silence settle, deliberate in my pacing, knowing that sometimes words are unnecessary. I want him to feel exposed, to confront the weight of his own dissonance. "Why are you here?" I finally ask, voice calm but penetrating, aiming directly at the core of his unrest. He hesitates, then speaks, voice barely above a whisper. I need help. I've made mistakes. I've kept secrets, terrible secrets." His words stumble out, revealing more than he intends. The trembling of his voice exposes the storm inside. Regret, shame, perhaps a flicker of longing for redemption. I lean forward slightly, my gaze steady. "Your secrets possess you, don't they? They're like chains, and no matter how much you try to hide them, they gnaw at your conscience." I pause, sensing his internal struggle. "But what if I told you that the only way to truly set yourself free is to give everything away?" His eyes widen, and I notice the flicker of disbelief, an instant of hope or maybe resistance. I can see the conflict raging within him as he processes my words. I continue, voice unwavering, "Not just a part of your wealth or a symbolic gesture, but everything. All of it, your fortune, your influence, your power." He recoils slightly as if I've struck a nerve. The room seems to close in around us, thick with unspoken truths. "You expect me to do that?" he whispers, voice trembling, a mixture of incredulity and desperation. "My entire life's work, all I've built." "Yes," I reply simply, voice firm. "That's the only way to break free from the chains that bind your soul. You see, your greed has hollowed you out, turned you into a shadow of a man. But true salvation isn't found in hiding behind wealth or status. It's in surrender." He looks away, eyes darting as if trying to find an alternative path, some escape route that I'm refusing to see. But there's no way out. I know that. I have seen this face before, clinging to illusions of power, desperately trying to outrun the truth. Yet this time, something seems different. I see the flicker of a man who might finally be ready to face himself. Slowly, he reaches into his pocket, pulling out a small leather wallet. His hands tremble visibly as he opens it, revealing a modest sum of money, nothing compared to his amassed fortune. I watch, silent. The symbolism is clear. He is contemplating sacrifice. "Are you willing to do this?" I ask, voice gentle yet insistent. "Are you prepared to let go of everything?" He hesitates, eyes fixed on the small amount in his hand, then glances at me. In that moment I see a shift, a crack in the armor. The internal battle rages visibly on his face. It's in the way he breathes, the way his jaw tightens, the way his eyes shimmer with unshed tears. I sense he's weighing whether he can truly part with it all, to free himself or condemn himself forever. And then slowly he nods. Not out of resolve, but out of desperation, a fragile acknowledgement that perhaps this is his only way out. He begins to speak, voice trembling. I will do it. I will give everything." I stand then, moving toward a desk where I keep a blank check. I pick up my pen, my hand steady despite the significance of what I'm about to do. I write all in the amount line, and then I turn to him. "Sign this," I say softly. "Declare your commitment. Let go of the illusion that wealth can buy salvation. Because once you do, there's no turning back." He takes the pen, clutching it as if it's a lifeline. His hand shakes, and for a moment I fear he might falter. But he presses the pen to the paper, and the ink flows, an act of surrender, a declaration of war against his past. The signature is shaky but resolute. As he looks up, I see it. The recognition, the dawning realization that he's crossed a threshold. His eyes shimmer with a mixture of relief and dread. The act is done. His future is now unwritten, and the chains he once carried are broken, or perhaps just loosened enough for him to see the possibility of true freedom. I feel a strange sense of relief, too. I have guided him to this precipice, knowing that in surrender he might find salvation or damnation. Either way, I have helped him confront the darkness within, and in that confrontation, perhaps, lie the seeds of real transformation. I lean back, watching him sit there, battered but unbowed. I know this is just the beginning. His journey of complete surrender has only just begun. And I am left to wonder, will he embrace this new freedom, or will he drown in the weight of his sacrifices? Only time will tell. But for now I let the silence settle, knowing I have done what I was meant to do. I sat across from him, the room thick with an uneasy silence that only I seemed to cut through with calm. His eyes darted around, desperately trying to mask the chaos roiling inside him. I could see it. The flicker of panic, the flicker of hope. It all danced behind his gaze, a silent confession of the war raging within his soul. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. Instead, he exhaled slowly, as if gathering the strength to face what he already knew deep down. I kept my expression neutral, waiting. I had learned that patience in these moments was more powerful than any argument I could muster. I understand, I finally said softly, deliberately, that you've spent years convincing yourself that your wealth is a shield, a safeguard against the chaos of life. But I want you to see something different today, something unvarnished and real. Your salvation isn't in hoarding power or riches. It's in surrender. Total surrender. His jaw tightened, and I could see the tension in his shoulders. He wanted to fight, to deny the truth I was laying bare. I knew the pattern. Denial, resistance, perhaps even a flicker of anger. But I also saw the cracks in his facade, the tiny fissures where doubt had begun to seep through. You see, I continued, the only way for you to truly heal, really heal, is to give everything away. Not just some, not even most, but all of it. Every shilling, every asset, every last penny. It's the only act powerful enough to shatter the illusion that you're in control. Because control is an illusion, just like the prosperity you cling to. He paused, his hand trembling slightly as he reached into his pocket, pulling out a crumpled tissue. He wiped his palms, already damp with sweat. I watched him, aware that this moment was carving itself into his consciousness, either as a turning point or a final act of resistance. Are you asking me to give away everything? He finally rasped, voice cracking. Yes, I replied without hesitation. There's no middle ground in this. It's all or nothing. Because only then can you see your true self, stripped of the masks, the power, the greed. Only then can you start to understand what it means to be free. He looked at me, searching for a sign, an indication of what was to come. I met his gaze steadily, unwavering, knowing that what I was suggesting was radical, dangerous even. But I also knew that no true transformation comes without risking everything. His eyes drifted downward, and I saw the flicker of 1,000 emotions, fear, curiosity, a glimmer of hope. I felt a rush of something akin to relief. This was the moment I had prepared for, the moment where he would choose his path. Can I really do this? He whispered, voice barely audible. Only if you believe that your salvation lies beyond wealth, I said softly, leaning forward slightly. Only if you want to be free from the chains that money has wrapped around your spirit. Because you can't buy your way out of this. You have to surrender completely. He swallowed hard, visibly trembling. The room seemed to hold its breath. I knew the battle wasn't over. This was merely the beginning of the war within. His mind churned, and I could see the gears turning. The old man, the corrupt politician, the man who had built his empire on deception, all of that was standing at the precipice of change. I reached into my bag, feeling the weight of what I was about to do. I pulled out a small plain envelope. Inside was a simple document, what I called the Declaration of Surrender. I slid it across the table toward him. This, I told him, is your chance. Sign this, and you commit to giving away everything. Every asset, every last cent, no conditions, no loopholes. Only then will you find a way back to yourself. He hesitated, eyes flickering with indecision. His hand hovered over the paper, trembling. I saw the internal struggle, the desire to cling to the remnants of his old self versus the faint hope of redemption. Are you sure? I asked gently, my voice barely more than a whisper. He looked up at me, and for the first time I saw something truly raw: vulnerability. Not the bravado of the politician, but a man stripped bare by his own fears. I nodded in encouragement, silently telling him that he was the master of his destiny now. Finally, he reached out slowly, almost reverently, and took the pen. His grip was unsteady, but he pressed the tip to the paper. The ink flowed, hesitant at first, but gaining momentum as he committed himself. His signature was shaky, yet it carried the weight of a man stepping into the unknown. As the pen lifted from the paper, a heavy silence settled over us. I watched as he sat back, breathing deeply, eyes fixed on the document in front of him. I knew from the look on his face that he was beginning to see the truth, a truth that had been hidden beneath layers of greed and denial. I felt a strange warmth inside me, mixed with a sense of solemnity. I had guided him to this threshold, knowing the act of surrender was the most brutal, yet potentially most liberating act of all. There was no turning back now. In that moment I recognized that I had done what I was meant to do. I had shown him the path, forced him onto it, by stripping away the illusions. And now only the future would reveal whether he would step into the light of true freedom or stumble back into the darkness he'd once known. I exhaled slowly, watching him sit there battered but unbowed, the weight of his decision settling over him. The room seemed to hold its breath, mirroring the tension inside my chest, because I knew this was just the start. The real work of transformation begins now. And as I watched him, I wondered, would he embrace this new chapter? Or would the ghosts of his past come rushing back, drowning him in regret? Only time would tell. But for now I held my silence, knowing I had done all I could. As I watched his face contort with a mixture of shock and something I recognized, fear, perhaps, or the faint glimmer of surrender, I knew I was walking a tightrope. His life was unraveling before my eyes, the very fabric of his existence threatening to tear apart at the seams. I could see the chaos brewing behind his eyes, the storm of denial fighting to stay afloat amid the sinking realization that he was truly at the edge of the abyss. His chest rose and fell unevenly as he processed what I had just told him, that his salvation, his escape from this spiraling destruction, depended solely on the most radical act imaginable, giving away everything. Not part, not some, but all of his wealth. The accumulation of years, perhaps decades, of greed, manipulation, and corruption, are reduced to nothing but a burden to be relinquished in a desperate hope for redemption. I leaned forward slightly, my voice steady but compassionate, knowing that beneath his veneer of control he was trembling. "You see," I said softly, "all the wealth in the world cannot buy you peace. It cannot mend the cracks in your soul or undo the damage you've done. The only way out is through total surrender. You must let go of everything, every dollar, every secret, every lie, and face yourself naked in the light of truth." His eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape, a loophole, some way to defy what I was asking. I understood his resistance, the instinct to cling to what's familiar, no matter how destructive. But I also knew that beneath that resistance, a tiny voice was whispering, "This is the only way." He took a shaky breath, attempting to steady himself, yet his hands betrayed him. They trembled as if holding invisible chains. His mouth opened, words caught in his throat, then finally he managed to whisper, "You want me to give it all away? My entire fortune?" The disbelief in his voice was almost amusing, but I saw through it. I saw the cracks in his facade widening, revealing a fractured man who had for too long been hiding behind the illusion of power. I nodded. "Yes, because until you surrender what you've hoarded, you will remain imprisoned by your greed. Your wealth has become a barrier, a shield that keeps you from facing who you really are. I am here to help you break down that barrier, to free you from the chains you've built around yourself." He looked away, tears threatening to spill from his eyes, an unspoken plea for mercy, for salvation. I could see him wrestling with the impossible, the surreal, giving everything away. How could he survive that? How could he find himself again after losing everything? But I also sensed an undeniable truth. This was his only chance, his last shot at redemption, even if that redemption meant starting from zero. My mind raced with the implications. Would he do it? Could he do it? Or would the weight of his past, of all he'd stolen and lied about, crush him before he even took the first step? I knew the process wouldn't be easy. Transformation is never gentle, but the seed was planted. That seed of change, fragile yet persistent, waiting to be nurtured. As I watched him, I felt a strange surge of hope mixed with solemnity. I knew the moment was critical, perhaps the most critical of his life. I had laid everything bare, offered him the harshest, most radical truth. Now it was up to him to choose. To leap into the unknown, or to retreat once more into the comfort of denial. I gently reached out, placing my hand over his trembling one. "You are on the precipice of something profound," I whispered. "Embrace this moment. Let go of what binds you, because only then can you truly begin again." His gaze met mine, and in that instant I saw the flicker of a man who was finally ready to confront his demons. Whether he would walk through the fire or retreat into the darkness, I could not say. But I knew that I had done my part, laid the foundation for his transformation, and as I withdrew my hand, I felt a quiet certainty settle within me. The road ahead would be arduous, perhaps even impossible at times, but change had begun. I could sense it in his trembling breath, in the faint, almost imperceptible nod. That was the moment. A crack in his armor, a crack in his soul, through which hope could finally seep in. I sat back, my heart pounding with anticipation and a strange, unshakable faith. This was the crucible of rebirth, and I was here guiding him, knowing that the true journey was only just beginning. I watch him carefully. Every micro-expression, a twitch of his brow, the slight narrowing of his eyes, trying to decipher what lies beneath his veneer of confidence. His posture is stiff, yet there's a crack, a subtle tremor in his hand that betrays his internal tumult. I let the silence stretch between us, feeling the weight of his unspoken fears, his denial, his desperate clinging to what he believes defines him. His gaze flutters away, evasive as if shielding himself behind a fortress of arrogance. But I catch the fleeting flicker, an almost imperceptible flash of vulnerability. That's when I realize, beneath that polished exterior, he's a fractured man, haunted by the shadows of his own choices, drowning in a sea of guilt he refuses to confront directly. Yet here he is seeking counsel, not for redemption but for salvation from himself. I lean in slightly, my eyes narrowing as I articulate my belief with deliberate calmness. "Your salvation," I whisper, voice steady but measured, "is not found in the wealth you hoard nor in the power you wield. It is in relinquishing every ounce of that, in offering it away, that the weight of your sins can truly be lifted." His breath stutters, a sudden hitch in his chest, as if I've struck a nerve deep inside him. A flicker of disbelief appears in his eyes, brief but unmistakable, followed by a flicker of hope so fragile it could have been snuffed out by the mere suggestion. I see him wrestle with the idea, his mind spiraling into chaos, trying to deny what I am proposing. Yet beneath the surface I also catch a spark, a glimmer of possibility, however faint and fleeting, that perhaps, just perhaps, he senses the truth of what I say. He shifts uncomfortably in his seat, his fingers tapping an uneven rhythm on the armrest. His lips part as if to speak, but no words come. Instead, he looks away, fixing his gaze somewhere distant, as if trying to escape the reality I am laying bare. I notice his jaw tighten, the muscles flexing with a tension that hints at a conflict raging inside him, conflict between his greed and the faint whisper of conscience. I understand that this moment is a crossroads. It's not merely about money. It's about a man confronting the core of his being, facing the abyss of his choices. I can see the battle within him, the desire to hold on to his legacy versus the gnawing sense that only surrender can bring true liberation. That surrender, I know, begins with a complete act of giving, selling, donating, relinquishing his amassed power and wealth. My voice remains soft but unwavering. Think about it. Imagine the relief. No more secrets, no more hiding behind walls of gold. Your wealth becomes not a tool of corruption, but a catalyst for genuine change. Your legacy will no longer be tainted by greed, but redeemed by the act of selflessness. He looks down, eyes darting toward his lap, where his fingers absent-mindedly trace the fabric of his suit. I see the turmoil in his expression, an internal war that he's desperately trying to suppress. He is a man who has built his identity around control, around wealth and around power. Yet in this silent moment, I can almost see the cracks forming in that facade, the faint fissures that herald a potential breakthrough. Every second feels like an eternity as I wait for him to respond. I allow the silence to deepen, knowing that sometimes the most profound truths are absorbed in the quiet, in the stillness that follows a challenge. I see his eyes dart again, this time with hesitation, then slowly lift, locking onto mine with a flicker of something unspoken, an acknowledgement, perhaps, of the truth that I have laid before him. "Are you willing," I finally ask, my voice gentle but firm, "to let go of your greed, your ego, your need for control? Are you prepared to give all that you've accumulated to those who need it most, trusting that in doing so, you will find your true salvation?" He hesitates, the pause stretching long enough to feel like an eternity. Then, almost imperceptibly, he nods. Just a slight movement, but to me it's a seismic shift, a crack in his armor, a crack in his soul. He is acknowledging that perhaps, just maybe, the path to redemption begins with surrender. Complete, uncompromising surrender. I hold his gaze, feeling a mixture of relief and cautious optimism. I know the road ahead isn't easy. It demands more than just words. It demands action, radical, unwavering action. But today I see the first sign, a fragile seed of transformation taking root, and I am ready to nurture it, every step of the way. As I sit back, I feel a quiet certainty settle within me. This moment, this vulnerable, raw moment, is the beginning of everything. The beginning of his truth and maybe his salvation. And I know that in guiding him here, I have done what few could, forced him to confront himself in the mirror and see what he refused to face before. The journey of redemption is long and arduous, yet this small crack in his armor signifies hope. Hope that change is possible, that even the most broken can find their way back to light. And I am here, ready to walk with him, to witness his transformation unfold. Step by step, I studied him carefully, observing how he shifted in his seat, attempting to mask a flicker of defiance with a veneer of calm. His hands, I noticed, clenched and unclenched instinctively, betraying the turmoil roiling beneath his composed exterior. I leaned in slightly, my voice steady but unwavering. "Tell me, do you truly believe your actions stem from necessity? Or is it simply the desire to hold on to power at any cost?" He blinked, hesitated, then offered a rehearsed explanation, the usual rhetoric, how he was merely doing what was necessary to serve his ambitions, how every move was justified by a greater good that only he could define. I listened patiently, nodding occasionally, knowing full well the dance he was trying to perform. It was predictable, but that didn't make it any less dangerous. I let silence settle for a moment, then broke in. "You've spun your web of justification so intricately that you've convinced yourself it's righteousness. But tell me, what is morality if not the compass that guides our actions when no one is watching? What is your morality if it's built solely on manipulation and control?" His lips pressed into a thin line. He looked away briefly, as if searching for an escape route in the shadows of his conscience. I pressed on. "You strategize, you manipulate, you exploit the system, yet you call it pragmatism. I see through your words. I see the cracks in your facade. You're not the master of your destiny. You're a prisoner of your own making." A flicker of irritation crossed his face, but it was quickly masked. I knew I had struck a nerve. I could feel the tension thickening, wrapping around us like a shroud. "Let me ask you this," I continued, voice sharper now. "If your wealth and power are merely tools of control, then what happens when you have nothing left to manipulate? When your reputation is tarnished, your influence evaporates. What remains of you then?" He paused, eyes narrowing, trying to regain composure. "You don't understand the complexities of politics," he muttered, voice trembling just enough to betray his uncertainty. "Oh, I understand perfectly," I countered, leaning forward. "I see a man so afraid of losing what he has that he's willing to sell his integrity, his soul, for fleeting security. But let me tell you something. Security built on lies is a house of cards. It will collapse, and when it does, what are you left with? A hollow shell, a man who sacrificed everything for illusions." His jaw clenched, and for the first time I saw a glimpse of genuine emotion, fear perhaps, or shame. I pressed on. "Your strategies, your manipulations, they're nothing but smoke and mirrors. They deceive others, but they cannot deceive yourself. Deep down, you know that your actions are destructive. That's why you're here. That's why you sought me out. because you sense the end of your illusion is near and you're desperately trying to justify what's unjustifiable. He looked down, silent for a long moment. I watched as the facade cracked further, revealing the fractured man beneath. I wanted to push him further, to make him confront the raw truth hiding behind his clever defenses. "You may think that controlling others keeps you safe," I said softly. "But true safety comes when you relinquish your need to dominate. When you accept that morality isn't a weapon to wield, but a compass to follow." His voice was barely a whisper now. "And what's left for me if I do that?" I smiled, not cruelly but with a quiet certainty. "What's left is the possibility of genuine redemption, of reclaiming what's truly valuable. Your integrity, your peace, your soul. Giving away your wealth, your power. It's the only way to shed the illusions of control and face yourself honestly. That's where real strength lies, not in manipulation but in surrender." He looked at me with a mixture of confusion and reluctant acknowledgement. He was grappling with the idea that his strategies, his carefully crafted manipulations, were all illusions, phantoms that concealed a deeper, more vulnerable truth. I saw the struggle in his eyes, the battle between his ingrained instincts and the faint glimmer of conscience awakening within. I held his gaze, pressing gently but firmly. "You can continue to justify your actions, or you can choose to change. You've come this far, and I believe what you seek isn't just redemption from me but from yourself. The choice is yours, but know this. No layer of deception can save you from the consequences of your moral decay. Only honesty, only true surrender can free you from the chains you've built around yourself." His shoulders sagged slightly, the fight draining from him. I could see the weight of his decisions pressing down, pushing him toward a precipice he'd been avoiding for too long. I knew that beneath the veneer of control, something fragile was awakening. A desire to be whole again, to find meaning beyond greed and manipulation. I sat back, watching him wrestle with his own reflection in the dark mirror I placed before him. In this moment, I understood that the battle for his soul was far from over, but I also knew that the first cracks had appeared. That was enough for now, enough to plant the seed of transformation, and to remind him that sometimes the only path to true salvation is through the uncomfortable, honest acknowledgement of one's own moral failure. And I was ready to walk that path with him, step by step, until he found his way back to himself. I watched him closely, noting the subtle tremor that betrayed his composed facade. His face, usually so confident and unyielding, now appeared gaunt, shadowed by the weight of my words. As I explained that his salvation, true, unshakable salvation, lay only in the complete surrender of his amassed wealth, I saw a flicker of something I hadn't expected: hesitation, perhaps even regret. The room grew heavy with silence, and I felt a strange calm settle over me, as if I had just handed him a mirror to see his own reflection, raw and unadorned. I knew this moment was pivotal. It was not just about money, not about justice, but about confronting the deepest layers of his own humanity, or dehumanization. Depending on how he chose to see it, his breathing grew irregular, as if the air itself was becoming too suffocating. And then, unexpectedly, a single tear traced its discreet path down his cheek. That tiny drop carried more weight than all the words I had spoken. I saw the struggle, the silent war between his ingrained greed and the faint, persistent whisper of conscience. I wondered if this hidden anguish was the first crack in his armor, or merely a fleeting illusion of remorse meant to deceive both of us. I felt my own pulse quicken, sensing that this tear was a fragile thread connecting him to himself, a tentative step toward redemption, or perhaps just acknowledgement of his moral decay. Was this small, silent admission the beginning of his journey back from the abyss? Or was it just a fleeting moment of vulnerability before he sealed himself tighter within his fortress of denial? I allowed the silence to stretch, knowing that sometimes words only serve to obscure what is truly happening beneath the surface. Instead, I studied his eyes, those windows that refused to reveal all, yet now shimmered with unspoken struggles. I wondered how much pain lay buried beneath his polished exterior, hidden behind the mask of power. In that fleeting instant, I decided to say nothing, to let his tears speak for him, to let his silence do the heavy lifting. I kept my gaze steady, knowing that sometimes the most profound truths are revealed, not through speech but through the quiet surrender of one's defenses. I pondered whether This tear was merely a sign of discomfort, or a genuine crack in his emotional armor, perhaps the beginning of an awakening. Regardless, I knew I had delivered what I intended, a mirror, a confrontation, an invitation to choose a different path. Whether he would accept it or retreat further into denial, that was up to him. But I couldn't help feeling that beneath the surface, something had shifted, no matter how slightly. That fragile, trembling hope that change might still be possible. I looked at him, and I knew that this moment, so silent and so profound, would linger with both of us longer than words ever could. I watched as his eyes widened, the shock hitting him like a blow to the gut. It wasn't just surprise, it was a visceral jolt of disbelief, the kind that rattles the bones and leaves a lingering tremor in the mind. I could see the gears turning behind those irises, trying to process what I had just proposed, an almost ludicrous notion, to someone so deeply entrenched in greed and power. For a moment, silence stretched between us, a heavy, oppressive silence that almost seemed to vibrate with the weight of what I'd said. I kept my gaze fixed on him, studying the flicker of emotion that danced across his face. Was it embarrassment, fear, or was he secretly contemplating the possibility of surrender? I knew better than to expect immediate understanding or agreement. Change, real change, was rarely swift or painless. I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice to a whisper that carried the gravity of a confession. Your salvation, I repeated softly, isn't in clinging to what you've amassed, but in releasing it. All of it, your entire fortune. If you want to truly free yourself from this cycle of corruption, that's the only way. His lips parted for a moment as if to speak, but no words came. Only a breath that seemed to hitch and falter, like a fragile thread threatening to snap under the weight of realization. His eyes darted away for an instant, searching the wall behind me as if seeking refuge in some distant memory. Then he looked back, and the shock was replaced by a strange, almost childlike despair. I saw the flicker of hope, no matter how faint, wrestling with the dread of loss. To him, the idea of giving up his entire wealth was unthinkable. It was a surrender of power, of status, of everything he had built his identity around. Yet beneath that resistance, I sensed a crack beginning to form, an opening, however small, for genuine reflection. His voice finally broke the silence, trembling and uncertain. You expect me to give away everything? All my assets, my investments, my influence? His words hung in the air, heavy with incredulity. I nodded slowly, not because I needed to, but because I wanted him to feel the truth of what I was asking. Yes, that's the only cure I see left for you. Your riches have been a barrier, an armor that shields you from facing the real damage you've done. Removing that armor, stripping yourself bare, is the only way to start healing. He stared at me, eyes searching for some hidden loophole, some escape route. But I knew that in that moment, I had his full attention, an attention that was both terrified and desperate. I could see the internal storm brewing, the clash between his ingrained greed and the faint, almost rebellious whisper of conscience trying to surface. Think about it, I urged softly. Not as a loss, but as a liberation. You've built a fortress of wealth, but inside I wager you feel hollow, empty. This is your chance to shed that hollow shell, to step into a different version of yourself, one that's not defined by what you've stolen or accumulated, but by what you give. His eyes fluttered, and I caught a glimpse of vulnerability, a rare, fleeting window where he was no longer the powerful puppet master, but a broken man confronted with his own reflection. I knew this wasn't an easy pill to swallow, and I wasn't naive enough to believe he'd say yes immediately. But I also knew that I had planted a seed, one that might grow if nurtured with patience and persistence. He looked down, his jaw clenched, fighting the tide of denial that had carried him so far for so long. I saw the internal battle play out, a war between greed and guilt, between denial and remorse. It was in the trembling of his hands, the slight quiver of his lips, and the way his shoulders sagged under the weight of realization. I don't know if I can do that, he finally whispered, voice husky and strained. I allowed a gentle smile to touch my lips, not because I was pleased, but because I understood. I don't have to decide now, I said softly. Just understand that the path to true redemption begins with a single step, one that's often the hardest to take. But I promise you it's also the most freeing. He looked at me, eyes glossy and haunted, as if trying to find some final justification to cling to what remained. And I knew in that moment that he was closer to the edge of transformation than he had ever been before. The choice was his: continue to drown in the illusion of control, or embrace the vulnerability that could lead him to genuine salvation. As I sat there, watching him wrestle with his own demons, I felt a quiet certainty settle over me. I had laid out the ultimatum, the radical truth, that only surrender could unlock his cage. Whether he would seize that chance or retreat into denial, I couldn't say. But I understood more clearly than ever that this was the beginning of something profound. A flicker of hope amid the darkness, a chance for him to reclaim his soul from the abyss. And I was prepared for whatever came next, knowing that sometimes the greatest act of compassion was to refuse solace and instead offer a brutal but necessary truth. I watched him struggle, the silent battle raging behind his eyes, his jaw clenched tightly, knuckles whitening as he pressed his fingertips against the wooden surface before him. I knew the storm inside him, pride, greed, shame, clashing in a chaotic dance that threatened to tear him apart. His lips parted as if to speak, but no sound came. Only a faint trembling betrayed his inner turmoil. I remained calm, though inside I pulsed with a quiet intensity. I had seen this moment before. When the ego refuses to bow, when the mind clings desperately to illusions of power and eternal wealth. Yet I also recognized the flicker of vulnerability, the fragile hope that perhaps, just perhaps, he could surrender something far greater than a mere possession. I had laid the foundation, offered him the only true salvation I knew, complete unconditional generosity. Now it was his move. He shifted in his chair, the movements hesitant, almost subconscious. I observed every twitch, the way his shoulders sagged under the weight of his pride, how his fingers unconsciously played with a loose thread on his sleeve. His gaze drifted away from mine, staring at some distant point that no longer seemed to hold promise. I knew he was battling himself, weighing the cost of his greatest asset against his deepest fears. "Is it possible," he finally breathed, voice hoarse and trembling, "that I could give everything away? All I've built, all I've accumulated, just like that?" His eyes darted back to me, hunger and despair flickering within them. "Is that the answer? To lose it all? To start over?" I let the silence stretch, listening to the faint hum of the outside world seep through the room's closed windows. I didn't rush him. I knew the importance of this moment. The decision was not in my hands, it belonged to him alone. But I also understood that his refusal, his stubborn clinging to what he thought defined him, would only deepen his suffering. The truth was harsh but necessary. His wealth was a barrier, a shield that kept him from confronting his own darkness. His guilt, his remorse. I finally responded, voice measured yet imbued with conviction. "You fear losing everything. I understand that fear, it's natural. But consider this. What remains of you if all your riches vanish? If your name, your reputation, your power are stripped away, would that not leave you with only the raw, unadorned truth of who you are?" He looked away again, trembling visibly. His hands shook, betraying the stoic mask he desperately tried to maintain. I saw through him, a man torn apart by his own contradictions. His pride told him to fight, to hold on tighter, to cling to the illusion of invincibility. But deep down I sensed the tremor of something else, an ember of genuine longing for liberation, for authenticity. "Imagine," I pressed softly, "a life where you no longer hide behind your wealth, where your value is no longer measured by possessions or power, but by your capacity for true change. Think of the relief in relinquishing the burden of guilt, of shame, of regret, by offering what's most precious, your accumulated fortune. Not for me, not for anyone else, but for yourself." The words hung in the air, heavy and pointed. I could see the wheels turning in his mind. The resistance flickered, blinking like a dying candle struggling to stay alight. I knew the battle wasn't over yet, that he could retreat into denial or succumb to his deepest fears. But I also knew that this moment, the cusp of surrender, was a fragile door that, once opened, could lead to genuine redemption. His voice was barely audible when he finally whispered, "And if I do it? If I give everything away, what's left? Who am I then?" I leaned forward slightly, meeting his gaze with unwavering conviction. "That's precisely the question. Who are you without your wealth? And I promise you, When you shed your possessions, you shed the false layers that have kept you distant from yourself. You will find a clarity that no riches can buy. You will discover freedom, true, unshackled, profound. He swallowed hard, eyes brimming with unshed tears. I saw the storm of conflict in him, the push and pull between his desire to cling and his instinct to let go. He hesitated, muscles tensing as if he weighed the final cost of his soul. In that suspended moment, I felt a surge of compassion, an understanding that true change is rarely easy, that confronting oneself demands courage beyond measure. I knew that what I offered was not just a path to salvation, but a test of his willingness to face the abyss and emerge reborn. Finally, he exhaled slowly, as if releasing a long-held breath. The decision was not yet made, but the path had begun to crack open. So I saw that faint glimmer of hope flickering brighter, promising potential for transformation, and I sat there, quietly unwavering, ready to guide him further into the uncomfortable but necessary truth. Because sometimes, the greatest act of compassion is not to coddle, but to challenge, to strip away illusions and force someone out of their comfort zone into the light of genuine redemption. I sat silently, observing the way his mind wove through the tangled web of his thoughts. The room was thick with unspoken truths, a silence that stretched longer than I expected. I could see the flicker of internal struggle dance behind his eyes, hope, fear, doubt, all swirling in a turbulent storm. I knew this was the moment he was truly confronting himself, and I let him linger there, because sometimes the quiet is the loudest teacher. His breathing grew uneven, a subtle rise and fall that betrayed his inner conflict. As I kept my gaze steady, offering him no immediate answers, only the space to discover his own. I watched as his jaw clenched and unclenched, as if he was trying to find the words that could justify clinging to what he had built. His power, his wealth, his false sense of security. I remembered the countless stories I'd heard, the souls I'd helped unearth from the depths of their own darkness. This man, no different from those, was at the precipice of something both terrifying and liberating. I reminded myself that my role wasn't to force the truth upon him, but to gently coax it out, to serve as a mirror reflecting what he refused to see. He finally broke the silence, voice hoarse and trembling. But if I give everything away, what am I left with? Who am I supposed to be? I allowed myself a slow breath, then leaned forward, sensing that he was reaching for the core of his despair. That's the question, isn't it? Who are you when your possessions are gone? Without your name on the ledger, without your power, what remains of you? He looked away for a moment, eyes darting to the corner of the room as if searching for a way out. I saw his shoulders sag slightly, the weight of his own fears pressing down on him. I knew that beneath the surface, he was asking himself whether he could truly live without the illusion of control, whether he could face the vulnerability that came with surrender. I tell you this, I continued softly, the only way to find out who you really are is to strip away the layers that hide your essence. Your wealth, your influence, they've become barriers, not buffers. They've kept you from the raw, unfiltered truth of yourself. And I promise you, it's in that rawness that you will find the freedom you seek. Freedom from your own illusions, from the shackles of greed and pride. He hesitated, his eyes glinting with a mix of defiance and doubt, his lips pressed into a thin line, as if weighing whether to dismiss my words or to entertain their possibility. I could see the brief flicker of a thought. What if I actually did this? What if I took the leap and relinquished everything? The tension in the room was almost unbearable, yet I felt a profound sense of patience. I knew that beyond the surface resistance, a seed was taking root. I saw him inching closer to the edge of his comfort zone, teetering between surrender and rebellion. I understood that true change required not just my words, but his willingness to step into the unknown, to embrace the chaos that comes with genuine transformation. His voice finally broke the silence again, softer this time, almost a whisper. And if I do it? If I give everything away, what's left? Who am I then? I responded without hesitation, my words deliberate and firm. You are exactly what remains after everything that's not truly you is shed. You are the essence of your being, pure, unadorned, and real. When you let go of your possessions, you shed the false layers that have kept you distant from yourself. You will find a clarity that no riches can buy, a clarity that reveals your authentic self. And in that clarity, you will discover freedom, freedom that's unshackled and profound. His eyes searched mine, seeking reassurance, seeking a sign that this path wasn't a trap, but a true liberation. I felt my hope swell, knowing that perhaps, just perhaps, the storm within him was beginning to settle. Maybe in this moment he was starting to understand that vulnerability wasn't a weakness. No, it was the very key to his salvation. He swallowed hard, muscles tense, like he was trying to hold himself together. I saw the flicker of a tear threaten to escape, but he clenched his jaw instead. That small silent act told me everything. I was reaching him. The walls he'd built all his life, the defenses forged by years of survival and greed, were crumbling just a little more. I let the silence settle again, letting him process what I'd just shared. No pressure, no rush. I knew that true change doesn't happen in a moment, but unfolds gradually, like a delicate bloom opening to the sun. My role here was to be the still point, the mirror, the gentle force that nudged him toward that inevitable awakening. I saw his shoulders relax, ever so slightly, as if he was giving himself permission to consider the impossible. The faintest hint of a smile flickered on his lips, perhaps a sign of tentative hope or dawning understanding. Whatever it was, I knew that the journey he was about to undertake would be arduous but necessary, and I was ready to walk with him into that darkness, into that light, because I understood that sometimes the greatest act of compassion is not to shield someone from their pain, but to lead them through it, to confront their deepest fears and emerge on the other side, reborn and free. I watched him struggle with his words, the silent battle raging behind his eyes. The confession spilled from his lips so softly that I had to lean in, almost afraid to break the fragile moment. "I'm afraid," he admitted, voice trembling, the vulnerability pouring out in a whisper. "If I lose everything, including who I am, I won't be me anymore." His hands trembled on the table, fingers curling into fists as if clutching at the remnants of his identity, desperately trying to hold on to something that felt slipping away. I saw the raw fear etched into every line of his face, the fear of obliteration, of becoming nothing more than a shadow of the man he once was. I let the silence stretch between us, knowing that sometimes words only clutter the truth. Instead, I reached out and gently pressed my fingertips on the edge of the table, grounding him, anchoring him to the present. "You're afraid of losing yourself," I echoed softly, "and I understand that. Because what you're about to do, what I'm asking, is beyond what most would dare to consider. Giving away everything, surrendering your wealth. It's not just about money. It's about relinquishing the power, the control, the identity that those riches have come to define." He looked down at his trembling hands, then back up, searching my face as if seeking reassurance, a reassurance that he wouldn't be swallowed whole by the abyss that awaited him. I saw the flicker of a tear threaten to escape again, and I realized that beneath the facade of arrogance and greed, there was a man who had long since lost his way, who yearned desperately for redemption, even if he didn't know it yet. "You fear that without your wealth, you'll no longer be someone worthy," I said, voice steady but compassionate. "You believe that your worth is measured by what you own, what you've accumulated. But tell me, who are you without these possessions? Who are you when the lights are turned off, and there's no one to impress?" His eyes darted away, ashamed, perhaps ashamed of himself or of the truth he was beginning to face. I saw a flicker of defiance, but it was quickly overshadowed by resignation. "You've built a fortress around yourself," I continued. "A fortress of material comfort, of status, of power. But inside, beneath that armor, what do you find? Is there a person left? Someone who is real, who is genuine? Or have you become so intertwined with your riches that you've forgotten what it means to be human?" He took a shuddering breath and looked back at me, exhaustion and a flicker of hope mingling in his gaze. "I'm terrified," he whispered. "Terrified of losing everything I've worked for, everything I've become, if I give it up. What's left of me?" I reached across the table, my hand resting gently on his, grounding him in that moment. "What's left of you is what's beneath all of it, your true self, the one that's been buried under layers of greed and fear. Giving everything away isn't about losing who you are. It's about shedding the false self and finally confronting the person you've been avoiding." He looked at my hand, and then back into my eyes, searching for answers he couldn't quite articulate. I knew that this was the precipice, the point where he either clung to his illusions or stepped into the abyss that could set him free. "You're afraid of becoming nothing," I said softly. But maybe, just maybe, you're afraid of becoming everything you're meant to be. A tear finally slipped free, tracing a lonely line down his cheek. He wiped it away quickly as if ashamed, but I saw the vulnerability in that small act. I saw the cracks in his armor becoming wider, the possibility of transformation emerging from within. I squeezed his hand gently, not just as a gesture of comfort, but as a reminder. He was not alone in this. The path ahead would be treacherous, lined with doubts and fears, but it was also the only way forward, the only way to reclaim himself, not through possessions, not through the false identity he clung to, but through truth, vulnerability, and the courage to start anew. As I sat there, I felt a quiet confidence settle within me. This moment was his crucible, and though it might scar him, it would also forge him into something stronger, something real. And I would be there every step of the way, guiding him through the darkness toward the light, because I knew that sometimes the greatest act of compassion is to allow someone to face their worst fears and emerge on the other side. Unbroken and free, I leaned forward, the room feeling colder somehow, as if the shadows themselves were listening. I compared his soul to a tarnished mirror, cracked and clouded by the grime of greed and corruption. The truth I saw was brutal but necessary. Surgery was the only way to clear the reflection. Imagine, I began softly, that your soul is like a mirror, shattered and stained by years of selfishness. The dirt, the dark spots, those are the sins, the greed, the betrayals that have lodged deep within. Now think of your donation as a radical surgical procedure, an emotional operation that cuts away those corrupt residues, stripping out the stains and leaving only the unblemished truth behind. His eyes flicked to mine, searching for meaning in my words. I could see the flicker of resistance, the instinct to cling to what he knew, what he believed defined him. But I pressed on, my voice steady and unwavering. This is not just charity. It's a radical cleansing of the soul, a removal of the tumors that have festered there, poisoning your sense of integrity and purpose. The act of giving everything, abandoning the wealth accumulated through schemes and lies, is like removing a malignant mass that has taken root in you. I paused, letting the weight of the metaphor settle. Picture this surgical process. I take a scalpel to the corrupt layers that have embedded themselves in your core. The procedure is painful, perhaps even unbearable, but necessary. The anesthesia, in this case, is the promise of liberation, of freedom from the chains that have held you hostage. The scars will remain, marks of the operation, reminders of the past, but they fade over time, replaced by a clarity you never knew was possible. I saw his shoulders tense, a sign that my words were hitting somewhere deep. I continued more softly now. The anesthesia numbs the initial pain, but the real healing begins once the incision is made. When you let go of your wealth, you're not just surrendering possessions. You're removing the tumors of greed, the infected tissues of selfishness that have rotted your integrity from within. This is a radical, invasive procedure, necessary for true rebirth. My voice lowered, almost a whisper. Once the surgery is complete, you will feel lighter, unburdened by the weight of your sins. The scars will be visible for a time, but they are marks of renewal, not defeat. The process is raw, visceral, like peeling away layers of decay to reveal the unblemished true self underneath. I paused again, ensuring he understood. You have to trust the surgeon, me, your guide, who knows that only through this painful removal can you hope to heal. The anesthesia of denial, of comfort, must wear off if you ever want to see the man you could become, free of the corruption, untainted by the greed that once consumed you. His eyes shimmered with something, perhaps a mixture of fear and the faintest glimmer of hope. I sensed that this metaphor, this image of radical surgery, was piercing through his defenses. It was visceral enough to suggest that change is not easy, not painless, but inevitable, if he truly sought redemption. The room grew quiet, the weight of the metaphor lingering in the air like a heavy, humid fog. I understood that this moment was the beginning of a profound transformation. It was a rebirth, an emotional operation that required courage, surrender, and an acceptance of the pain necessary to emerge renewed. I saw him finally nod, almost imperceptibly. That was my signal. He was beginning to grasp the reality that his salvation depended on a brutal, honest excision of the corrupt layers that had taken root in his soul. That this surgery was the only path to genuine freedom. and I would be there to guide him through every incision, every scar, until he could stand unburdened by the weight of his past. In that silence I felt a quiet certainty. This was the moment of transformation, the radical, invasive procedure that would carve away the darkness and reveal the light beneath. And I knew with unwavering conviction that sometimes the only way to heal from within is to undergo the most painful surgery of all. As I watched him debate, I couldn't help but see past the surface into the depths of his mind where memories flickered like ghostly images, moments of ascent, of power, but also of inevitable downfall. His face, lined with the marks of years spent climbing and falling, told a story far richer than the words he spoke. Each wrinkle seemed to hold a fragment of his history, ambition, betrayal, remorse, yet underneath it all I sensed a flicker of something more genuine, more human. His hands trembled slightly, betraying the calm facade he desperately clung to. I saw the internal war raging within him, his desire to hold on to what he'd accumulated, and the gnawing feeling that perhaps, just perhaps, it was time to let go. I knew that for him, the path to salvation was not a simple redemption, but a radical act of surrender. I had made that clear from the start. His salvation was linked to surrendering everything, stripping himself of the gilded layers that cloaked his true self. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes darting around as if searching for an escape route. I watched the flicker of doubt cross his face when I mentioned the idea of donating his entire fortune. The words hung in the air, heavy and oppressive, like a verdict. His breathing grew shallow, and suddenly his voice fractured as he challenged me, questioning whether such a drastic act was even possible, whether he could truly give up everything he had fought so hard to build. I kept my gaze steady, knowing that beneath his resistance was a buried kernel of longing, perhaps a recognition that this was the only way forward. I had seen such moments before, where the pride and greed clouded the mind, but deep down a flicker of vulnerability illuminated the path toward change. I pressed further, emphasizing that the wealth he amassed was a reflection of his fears, his need for control, his attempt to shield himself from his own mortality. As he listened, I saw flashes of his past, his rise from humble beginnings, the cunning decisions that propelled him into influence, the alliances forged in shadows, and the betrayals that eventually marked his downfall. Memories flickered like fractured film reels, him accepting bribes in dimly lit corridors, smiling for the cameras while secretly clutching tight to his gains. Those moments, each one a brick in the fortress of his corruption, now seemed fragile, ready to crumble under the weight of truth. He hesitated, and I knew it was the moment of reckoning. The internal battle was reaching a crescendo. His eyes, once so confident and unyielding, now shimmered with uncertainty. Fear of losing everything, but also a whisper of hope that perhaps this relinquishment could set him free. I saw the conflict, his desire to cling to his empire and his instinct to escape the prison of his own making. I spoke softly, yet firmly, reminding him that true freedom could only be achieved through radical honesty with himself, that the chains of greed and power were the only prisons he had ever known, and unlocking those chains meant surrendering the very things he thought defined him. I told him that handing over his fortune wasn't just charity. It was a surgical removal of the malignant tumor of greed that had metastasized within his soul. His eyes finally settled, a flicker of resolve emerging amid the chaos. I could feel the tension in the room, alive and pulsating. We were at the cusp of a transformation, more than a negotiation, a rebirth. I understood that this moment, this intense dialogue, was a step toward the radical surgery that would strip away his illusions and force him to confront his true self. As the debate drew on, I allowed myself a moment of silent reflection. I saw in him not just a corrupt politician, but a man caught in the web of his own making, longing for redemption but terrified of losing everything, his identity, his power, his control. Yet underneath that fear, I sensed a seed of hope taking root, a fragile yet powerful desire to change. I knew that change wasn't easy. It would scar, it would hurt, but it was necessary. I had guided others through the same crucible, and I knew that sometimes the only way to heal from within was through pain. That true transformation required surrendering everything, your wealth, your pride, your illusions, and embracing the vulnerability that comes with it. As I looked into his eyes, I felt a quiet certainty. This debate was the prelude to his ultimate choice, the moment where he would either cling to his illusions or step into the light of true freedom. I understood that unless he was willing to sacrifice his wealth, to donate it all, he would remain ensnared in the prison of his own making. For that reason I pressed on, knowing that the decision he faced was perhaps the most difficult of his life. Because in giving everything away, he would lose more than just money. He would lose his identity, his ego, and the illusion of control. But in doing so, he might finally find the one thing he had been avoiding all along, himself. And I would be there to guide him through every scar, every trembling step, until he stood unburdened, reborn, free, and finally, truly alive. As I observe him sitting there, the flickering shadows cast by the dim light seem to dance over his features, echoing the turbulence within. I feel a strange mix of doubt and resolve swirling inside me. My mind grapples with the boundaries of my ethics. How far am I willing to go? Am I pushing too hard, or am I steering him toward the only true liberation? The questions linger unvoiced, yet they press heavily on my conscience. I see the conflict in his eyes, fragments of hope trapped behind walls of greed and denial. His chest rises and falls with uneven breaths, betraying the chaos within. I recall the countless times I've watched individuals drown in their own illusions, desperately clutching onto what they believe defines them. Yet here he is, trembling on the precipice of change, and I wonder, is my insistence too forceful? Or is it precisely what he needs to shatter those illusions? My voice remains steady, but inside I feel a tremor of uncertainty. I question if my conviction is enough to pierce through his defenses, if my words are falling on deaf ears cloaked in denial. Still I persist, because I believe that beneath his layers of corruption, a genuine desire for redemption flickers weakly, waiting for the right moment to ignite. I tell him that true freedom doesn't come from clinging to material possessions, but from shedding them, from facing the void that follows surrender. He shifts uncomfortably, eyes darting around the room as if seeking an escape route he knows isn't there. I catch that flicker of doubt, that sliver of hope. It's fragile. So fragile that I hesitate to crush it under the weight of my insistence, but I also know that without a radical act, without risking everything he's ever known, he remains captive in his own prison, trapped by his greed, by his ego, by the illusion of control. I speak slowly now, emphasizing each word, trying to anchor him in this moment of vulnerability. I remind him that the only way out of his torment is through complete relinquishment. To donate his entire fortune, every shilling, every asset, every hidden account, without hesitation or second thoughts. I watch as his jaw tightens, muscles clenched as if resisting an internal storm. His breath quickens again, and I wonder if he's contemplating the madness of such a gesture. Did I push too far? Will this be the breaking point or the awakening? I know that in giving everything away, he risks losing more than just wealth. He risks losing the identity he's built around his riches, the ego that feeds his power, the illusion that he's in control of his life. Yet I also understand that behind that facade of confidence lies a man desperately seeking authenticity, a man who fears the emptiness that might follow the act. A sudden silence settles between us. I can feel the weight of his stare, the battle raging behind his eyes. For a moment, I entertain the possibility that he might recoil, retreat into his comfort zone of denial. But then I see it, the faintest tremor of resolve. Could this be the start, a crack in the armor of his convictions? The ethical tightrope I walk feels thinner than ever. Am I an agent of true change, or merely a manipulator of desperation? I question whether my approach is pushing him towards salvation or further into despair. Still, I hold on to the conviction that sometimes genuine transformation demands pain, an upheaval of everything familiar. I lean slightly forward, lowering my voice to a whisper. Imagine a life unburdened by wealth, free from the chains of greed, unshackled from the illusions of power. Your legacy, if it exists at all, will be what you choose to leave behind. Truth, humility, and genuine change. Not in the money you hoard, but in the lives you transform through your sacrifice. I see a flicker of something in his eyes, hope, maybe, or the last remnants of resistance. I wonder if I am planting the seed of a revolution within him, or merely pushing him over the edge into despair. Time seems to stretch, and I realize that this moment could define the rest of his life. just as it might redefine mine. My internal battle rages. Do I cling to my principles and risk losing him entirely? Or do I loosen my grip, trusting that this radical act might be the only way to truly set him free? I hold my breath, waiting, knowing that whatever choice he makes in the coming seconds will ripple outward, shaping not just his future, but perhaps the future of many others who look up to him. I feel a quiet hope emerge, an unspoken belief that within the depths of his fractured soul, a new possibility is germinating, one that asks not what he can take but what he can give. And as I sit there in the silent expectance of his decision, I realize that I am no longer merely a guide, but perhaps a catalyst, a mirror reflecting a path he may finally choose to walk. In that moment, I fully understand. The greatest act of compassion I can offer is not to judge him for his sins, but to stand unwavering, holding space for the possibility that even the most broken among us can find redemption. And I am determined more than ever to be there when he takes that first trembling step into the unknown. I looked into his eyes, searching for something I might have missed before. An opening, a crack in his armor, a flicker of genuine understanding. He hesitated, then slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out a stack of banknotes, thick, glossy, and seemingly endless. I felt my stomach tighten. This was his offer, a portion of his ill-gotten gains, a fragile bandage over a festering wound. I shook my head gently, knowing that this gesture, though seemingly generous, was merely a token, a distraction from the real work that needed to be done. I knew that true healing couldn't be bought or bargained for. It required a surrender far deeper than handing over a few bills. I had to make him see that salvation was not a matter of redistribution, but of transformation, an entirely different kind of sacrifice. His hand trembled as he extended the money toward me. I felt the weight of it, both literal and symbolic. In that moment, I realized that he was testing the waters, gauging whether this act would be enough to absolve him, to ease his conscience. Or perhaps he was testing himself, trying to justify the enormity of what he was about to do. I took a breath, steadying my voice and my resolve. I told him that his money, no matter how vast, was merely a symptom of greed, of corruption, of a fractured sense of self. I explained that healing was a process of complete surrender, a total giving of oneself, not just a financial gesture. That the real cure demanded an act of radical honesty, an uncompromising commitment to change that went beyond numbers and figures. He looked at the money again, then back at me, his eyes darting with conflicting emotions, fear, anticipation, maybe even a flicker of remorse. I could see the conflict tearing him apart. I pressed on, describing stories I'd heard of others who had been lost in their pursuit of power, only to find redemption in sacrifice, sacrifices that cost everything, including what they thought defined them. You see, I said softly, the key isn't in giving away a part of what you own. It's in giving away what owns you. I paused, allowing my words to settle between us like a heavy fog. And that's what I believe you need, more than money, more than power. You need to relinquish your grip on everything that keeps your soul chained. He swallowed hard, the tension mounting. I could feel his internal struggle. To surrender his riches was, in his mind, to strip himself of security, status, identity. But I also saw the flickering embers of a different flame, one of hope, of liberation, of a chance to start anew. That's when I reached into my bag and pulled out a simple, unadorned object, a small worn cross that I kept as a reminder of what true sacrifice looked like. I placed it gently in front of him, as if offering a tangible symbol of what I believed was the real remedy. Offer everything, I told him. Not because you're weak, but because you are brave enough to face the truth that your salvation lies in your willingness to let go of what you cling to, even if it feels like your very identity. He studied the cross, then looked back at the money. His jaw tightened. I could tell that the temptation to hold on to what he had was enormous, that this moment was a test, a crucible that would reveal whether he was prepared to go all the way or retreat into his familiar lies. Are you ready to go further? I asked softly, not pressuring but challenging him to see beyond the surface. Because partial surrender isn't enough. The real healing demands everything, the truth, the pain, the loss, and only then can you truly be free. He hesitated for what felt like an eternity, then slowly withdrew his hand from the money. His eyes flicked between the pile of bills and the cross. A tear escaped, and I recognized it not as weakness but as a sign of awakening, a crack in the shell of his denial. "I understand," he whispered hoarsely. "I thought giving a part was enough, but I see now. It's never been about the money. It's about myself, my soul, and how much I'm willing to surrender." I nodded, feeling a quiet sense of triumph, knowing that this was only the beginning. The first step on a long, arduous journey, a journey of complete relinquishment, a journey to rediscover what it truly means to be whole. Because I knew that healing was not in the partial, the superficial, or the temporary. It was in the totality, an all-encompassing act of faith, of trust, of fearless vulnerability. And as he reached out to place the money on the table, I couldn't help but feel that perhaps, just perhaps, this was the moment he would finally let go of his greatest illusion, that wealth could buy redemption. I watched him, heart pounding as he took that first trembling step, away from materialism, away from the darkness, into an uncertain but undeniably brighter future. And I held my breath, knowing that I had done all I could, trusting that the seed of true healing had finally been planted deep within him. I looked directly into his eyes, feeling the silent tension ripple between us. His fingers clenched the edge of the table, as if it were a lifeline, anchoring him to the world he desperately tried to hold on to. I knew what he was thinking. How could I ask him to abandon everything he'd built, everything that gave him a semblance of control? Still, I had no choice. The truth was woven into every word I spoke. "You see," I began softly, "your possessions are not your salvation. They only serve to mask the emptiness you refuse to face. Clinging to wealth isn't security. It's a barrier, a fortress built to keep the pain inside. But fortresses are fragile, and the walls we erect become prisons once we realize they trap us more than protect us." His eyes darted away, blinking rapidly as if trying to erase my words from his mind. I could sense the internal struggle, an intricate dance of denial and longing. He leaned back slightly, his chest rising and falling in a rhythm that betrayed his attempt to remain composed. Yet beneath that veneer of calm I saw the tremor, an ember of doubt flickering in the depths of his gaze. "Tell me," I pressed gently, "what do you think your security is worth? The material comfort, the power it confers, you believe it shields you from chaos, from vulnerability. But isn't it just a shield against yourself?" He shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tightening. I watched the flicker of resistance in his eyes, a flash of stubbornness that refused to surrender. "It's not that simple," he muttered. "I need my things. They're not just possessions. They're my safety net. Without them, I'd be exposed, helpless." His words clung to the air, heavy with justification. I took a slow breath, choosing my words carefully. "Safety built on illusion isn't safety at all. It's a fragile illusion, a house of cards waiting to fall. I'm not asking you to give up everything overnight, only to consider what truly matters. Happiness, peace. Those are not bought with gold." He looked away, a flicker of guilt crossing his face, but also a stubborn resolve. I could see the battle raging inside him, the part of him that wanted liberation, and the part still clutching to his material fortress. He rubbed his hands together, as if trying to warm himself from the inside out. I knew that beneath his resistance, a seed of change had been planted, even if it struggled to break free. "Think about this," I continued softly. "What's left when you strip away the glitter, the titles, the power? Who are you then? Are you still afraid, still searching for meaning in what can be taken away? Or can you find strength in surrender, an act of courage that no amount of money can buy?" His lips pressed into a thin line, and I caught a glimpse of the turmoil behind his eyes. It was as if I'd handed him a mirror, and he was trying to decipher the reflection staring back. That reflection was unfamiliar, unsettling, yet undeniably honest. For a moment the room was silent, heavy with unspoken truths. He hesitated, nostrils flaring, then slowly, almost reluctantly, he reached into his pocket. His fingers brushed against a small object, perhaps a coin, a reminder of his security, his grip on what he thought was his salvation. I watched as he hesitated, the conflict evident in every muscle tense and trembling. "You say I should give it all away," he finally whispered, voice trembling. "But how do I protect myself? How do I face the world without my wealth? Isn't that just reckless?" I leaned forward, my voice gentle but firm. "Protection is an illusion. Real security comes from within, a clarity of purpose. a connection to something greater than possessions. When you let go of what you cling to, you might find that the very thing you fear losing is what's holding you back. His breath hitched again, and I saw him struggle, a man torn between old habits and the possibility of true freedom. The lies he told himself, the stories he'd woven around his possessions, they all flickered like shadows in the dim light. I knew this was the crucible, the moment of transformation if he dared to take the leap. "Look," I said softly, "you've built walls to guard yourself, but walls also imprison you. Perhaps the greatest act of bravery now is to dismantle them, to risk everything, your comfort, your security, your identity, in the hope of finding something genuine, something lasting." His eyes glistened, and I could see the weight of his resistance crumbling, just a little. A tear welled again, not out of weakness but of uncertainty, of a man questioning everything he'd held as truth. I understood that this wasn't an easy path, that the road ahead would be littered with doubt and fear. But I also knew that true change begins with acknowledgement, that the first step is simply accepting that the illusion of safety is a cage, and that only by surrendering the illusion can he truly break free. I kept my gaze steady, waiting for him to say what he couldn't quite bring himself to voice. Because I knew deep down he was on the cusp of a revolution, not just of possessions but of self, and I was here witnessing and guiding the first cracks in the fortress of his denial. I leaned forward, my gaze unwavering as I looked into his trembling eyes. The room seemed to shrink around us, the silence thick with unspoken truths. I knew this was the pivotal moment, the point at which he could choose to cling to his chaos or surrender to the possibility of renewal. "Your wealth," I began softly, "has become your prison. Every dollar, every asset, every secret account, it's a stain on your soul. And no amount of money can cleanse that darkness. The only true purge is to give it all away." He blinked rapidly as if the words had struck him physically. His jaw clenched, then relaxed, trying to hide the storm of emotions raging inside him. I understood perfectly. He was fighting an internal war, torn between the comfort of his accumulated power and the aching desire to be free from it all. I reached out, placing my hand gently on the table between us. "Think about it," I urged. "You've spent years cultivating your empire, building a fortress around yourself. But what good is it if it traps you? If your conscience gnaws at you every night? If guilt gnaws at your soul like an unrelenting beast?" His lips pressed into a thin line, yet I caught the flicker of doubt flickering behind his eyes. I pressed on. "Imagine walking away from every single asset, your mansion, your bank accounts, your political influence. Imagine washing your hands of the corruption, the lies, the manipulation. No more hiding, no more denial. Just raw, unvarnished truth." His breathing grew more ragged, and I saw him grapple with the enormity of the idea. I wanted to paint the picture vividly, to make him see that this wasn't just about money. It was about purification, about shedding the sins he'd accumulated, about purging the stains that had tainted his very soul. I saw the flicker of resistance flickering in his eyes, but I refused to let it extinguish. "Do you understand what I'm asking?" I pressed. "You must donate everything. Every penny, every asset, your entire fortune. Not to a charity that can be bought or manipulated, but to those who need it most. Because only then can your soul be truly cleansed." He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again, words failing him. I could see the gears turning, the internal debate raging in his mind. I knew this wasn't a simple act of charity. It was a radical act of surrender, a final resolute step toward redemption. "Imagine the liberation," I continued, voice steady, "when you release this burden, when you let go of the greed that's chained you. It's not about losing your wealth. It's about gaining your freedom, about finally shedding the weight of guilt and shame that has haunted you." The tension in the air grew thicker as I watched him wrestle with the weight of my words. His hands clutched his lap, trembling slightly. I saw the flicker of a man who'd spent his life cloaked in deception, now exposed bare and vulnerable. That vulnerability was the doorway, the thin crack in the armor he'd so carefully constructed. "Think of the legacy you want to leave," I added softly. "Not one built on greed or corruption, but on sincerity, on atonement. This is your path to genuine peace, an act of radical honesty, of complete surrender. The only way to wash away those stains is to let go of everything that caused them." His eyes welled again, but this time I sensed the shift, the faint beginnings of acceptance. I could see the dawning realization that the only true salvation was not through power nor wealth, but through humility and the courage to relinquish it all. In that moment, I knew I had planted the seed of transformation, of profound change. It was his choice now, to cling to his illusion of control or to embrace this act of radical honesty as the first step toward redemption. I sat back, giving him space to breathe, to decide. Because I understood that true liberation only comes when one has the courage to confront the darkest parts of oneself and to let go of what no longer serves. And I was prepared to walk with him on that journey, no matter how difficult it might be. As I watched him struggle with the weight of my words, I felt a strange calm settle over me. I explained that this act, this radical donation, was like a surgical procedure, a vital cleansing that could purge his soul of all the grime accumulated over years of greed and deception. I saw his eyes flicker again, this time with a flicker of comprehension, as if the pieces were slowly fitting into place. I leaned forward slightly, lowering my voice to a whisper. Imagine your wealth as a disease, something that has infected your spirit, clouded your morals. Now picture this donation as the scalpel that cuts out the infection, removing the poison from your veins, purifying what remains. He hesitated, his jaw clenched tight. The room felt heavy, thick with unspoken fears and hopes. I could see the internal war raging within him, the desire to escape the burden of guilt, yet the fear of losing everything he thought defined him. I reached out and placed my hand gently on his, feeling the tremor beneath my fingertips. I wanted to convey that this was not just about money. It was about liberation from himself. His eyes darted to the window where sunlight streamed in, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, tiny particles of truth shimmering in the dim room. I knew that in that moment, the metaphor hit home. His mind began to open, if only a crack, to the possibility that true freedom lay beyond material possessions. Think of this donation as a form of radical transformation, I continued. It's a rebirth, an act of courage, of unwavering honesty. You're not just giving away dollars. You're relinquishing the chains that have bound you to a life of corruption. This is your surgery, your purification. You will emerge lighter, freer, your past cleansed, your future unburdened. He sat back, eyes fixed on the floor, processing every word. I saw his chest rise and fall slowly, a sign that the storm within was settling, if only temporarily. I knew that the decision wasn't made yet, but with this analogy, I hoped to bridge the chasm between his conflicting emotions. I continued softly, "The scar from this surgery will be a reminder, an everlasting symbol of your sacrifice, a testament to your willingness to confront your demons. The pain of letting go is temporary, but the peace that follows is everlasting. You have the power to choose this path, to cut out the infection and start anew." His hands clenched and unclenched, and I sensed that the seed I planted, this image of a cleansing operation, was beginning to sprout. I understood that change isn't instantaneous. It is a process, a series of small, deliberate steps. But I also knew that sometimes a vivid metaphor can serve as a catalyst, a spark that ignites the dormant ember of transformation. I watched him breathe, and I realized that for him, this moment was a crossroads. He could cling to the illusion of control, or he could surrender to the truth of his brokenness and the possibility of redemption. I was prepared to guide him through either path, but I hoped deep down that he would choose the radical surgery, because in that act of surrender, I believed he could find salvation. I sat back quietly, giving him the space to reflect, knowing that the metaphor of purification had planted a seed that might someday grow into a full-fledged transformation. Because I understood that sometimes the most powerful healing begins not with words, but with a vivid image that resonates in the core of one's being. I leaned forward slightly, my eyes never leaving his as I gently pressed the point deeper. "Imagine it," I said softly. "The sensation of unshackling yourself from every material tie, every mental grip that keeps you anchored in this cycle of greed and denial. Picture the moment you release your hold, the weight lifting from your shoulders as you let go of what no longer serves you." I paused, giving him space to breathe those words in. I saw the flicker of hesitation cross his face, a subtle shift that told me he was beginning to envision what I asked. "Feel the act of unburdening your mind," I continued, "as if shedding layers of rusted armor, revealing a raw, vulnerable core beneath. It's not just about giving away money. It's about surrendering the illusion of control, about dismantling the fortress of ego that has kept you imprisoned for so long. His hands trembled slightly, fingers curling inward before relaxing again. I knew by now that his mind was racing, weighing the idea of sacrifice against the comfort of his known world. I pressed further, my voice steady and deliberate. Can you imagine the sensation of walking away from your empire, the jewels, the power, the influence, and feeling lighter, freer, not in a moment of shock, but as an act of deliberate choice, to strip away the false layers, the masks, and face what remains your authentic self, unencumbered? His eyes darted to the floor, then back to me, searching for a foothold amid the overwhelming tide of emotion. I could sense the internal battle raging in him, the desire to cling to what he knows versus the temptation to embrace the unknown, to truly let go. This isn't about charity, I added gently. It's about liberation. The moment you relinquish everything, your wealth, your possessions, even your pride, you step into a space of absolute honesty with yourself. You cease to be defined by your possessions and start to rediscover who you are beneath all that accumulation. I watched his shoulders sag slightly, as if I'd pulled the curtain back just enough to reveal the vast, uncharted emptiness behind. I knew that in that emptiness resided the potential for rebirth, a blank canvas waiting for him to paint anew. Picture the sensation, I urged softly, of standing in a vast open plain, unburdened by burdens, feeling the wind whisper through your renewed soul. It's a release, not just of money, but of years of false security, of fears, of guilt. Imagine that moment where everything you've built crumbles away, and all that remains is your true self, raw, honest, unguarded. His eyes focused on a distant point, and I saw a flicker of understanding ignite. I could sense, almost tangibly, the tremor of a shift within him, a desire to surrender, to relinquish the chains that kept him tethered to his greed. The challenge was not just to persuade, but to make him feel the weight and the freedom of that act, to experience it viscerally. I leaned back slightly, my voice lowering to a whisper of conviction. You see, the act of letting go isn't a sign of weakness. It's the bravest thing you can do. To tear down the walls, to walk away from the illusion of control, and embrace the emptiness. That's where true freedom begins. And when you free yourself from the illusion of material possession, you find a strength that no riches can buy. The room grew quiet, thick with unspoken possibilities. I watched his breathing slow, and I knew he was interiorizing what I'd asked him to imagine. I allowed silence to fill the space, knowing that sometimes the most profound shifts occur not in words, but in the silent acknowledgement of what's possible. As I sat there, I felt a quiet confidence swell within me. I had planted a seed, an image of liberation that he might carry, even if he couldn't grasp it fully today. Because I understood that the road to transformation is paved with small, deliberate steps, and sometimes the simplest act, imagine letting go, can be the most revolutionary of all. I watched the conflict raging behind his eyes, the war between greed and the faint whisper of redemption. This was the culmination of our conversations, the crescendo where words fell short and only action remained. His chest rose and fell unevenly, a rhythm dictated by doubt and hope tangled tightly within him. I knew I had to hold firm, to push just enough to tip the scales, but not so hard as to shatter what fragile resolve he had managed to summon. I leaned forward, my voice steady yet gentle, like a hand guiding him through a storm. You see, I said softly, the true surrender isn't about losing everything. It's about finally understanding what you've gained from it. Nothing that your money can buy. Only the freedom that comes from letting go. I paused, watching the flicker of internal struggle dance across his face. His eyes darted away momentarily, as if seeking an escape route, then slowly returned to meet mine. I could sense the flicker of real hesitation as he grappled with the enormity of his decision. Every fiber of his being seemed to resist, yet I could also see the faint glimmer of a man, ready to break free from his self-imposed shackles. It was a delicate moment, an almost imperceptible shift in the air, like the first crack of dawn piercing a long, dark night. I pressed on, knowing that sometimes words are merely a prelude to a deeper understanding. Imagine, I suggested, a life unburdened by the weight of wealth, A life where your worth isn't measured by the size of your bank account, but by the courage to face yourself honestly. I watched him closely, noting how his jaw tightened and then loosened, as if trying to gather strength from within. He swallowed hard, his gaze flickering with unspoken questions. I could see him weighing the consequences, the possible loss, the empty space that would remain if he relinquished everything. But amid that turmoil, I also saw a flicker of clarity, an opening through which genuine change might enter. I knew he was at a crossroads, the moment where a single decision could shatter the illusion of control he so desperately clung to. And in that silence, I felt a surge of confidence. I had done my part. I'd planted a seed that, if nurtured, could grow into a new life for him. This moment was not just about convincing him to give away his wealth. It was about awakening his consciousness to the fact that true power lies in surrender, in humility, in the acknowledgement that what he sought externally was a hollow echo of something he'd lost long ago. He looked away again, lips pressed together, as if trying to silence the tumult of thoughts crashing through him. His hands trembled slightly, betraying the calm facade he desperately wished to maintain. I sensed that soon the internal battle would culminate in a decisive act, a step that could unshackle him from his greed forever. Then, suddenly, his gaze locked onto mine with a quiet intensity. I saw the moment, the instant when his internal defenses crumbled and a fragile, trembling resolve took hold. That was the moment I'd been waiting for. The moment I knew he was ready. He hesitated, voice trembling as he finally broke the silence. How do I do it?" he asked, voice barely more than a whisper. The question hung between us, heavy with expectation and uncertainty. I offered him a gentle nod, feeling the weight of the truth in my words. "You do it by giving everything away," I said softly. "Not just your money, but your attachment to it, your sense of identity wrapped up in wealth. You relinquish control, accept the emptiness, and in that emptiness you find your true self. That's the only cure, when you realize that your riches are nothing compared to the richness of a life free from greed." The answer was simple, yet profound. I knew this was the turning point, when the internal voice of fear would clash with the whisper of liberation. I saw his shoulders stiffen as he processed the enormity of what I'd asked. Yet beneath that resistance I glimpsed a flicker of willingness, a spark that could ignite a fire of transformation. His eyes searched mine, an unspoken plea for reassurance, for confirmation that he wasn't too late. I met his gaze squarely, feeling a quiet conviction swell within me. I had guided him to this brink, but he would have to leap himself. All I could do was stand ready, offering him the understanding that this act, the ultimate act of surrender, was not just the end of his greed, but the beginning of his liberation. And then, in a breath that felt like the first real step toward redemption, he nodded slowly. The decision was made. His voice was hoarse but steady now. "I will do it," he whispered. "I will give everything away." In that moment I saw a profound shift, a man stepping beyond his fears into a space of raw honesty and freedom. I knew his journey was only just beginning, but that single act of giving would ripple through his life, transforming him in ways he'd never imagined. Because sometimes the only true cure is the courage to let go. And when someone finally does, the universe responds with a kind of grace that words could never fully express. I watched as he drew in a slow, deliberate breath, the kind that seems to gather every ounce of courage before unleashing a storm of emotion. His chest rose and fell with a heaviness that seemed to echo the entire weight of his life. Wealth amassed through whispers of corruption and deals sealed in shadows. The room felt thick, almost suffocating. Yet beneath my calm exterior I sensed this moment was critical. A crossroad where everything could change. He finally spoke, voice trembling but resolute. "I will do it." The words felt like a thunderclap piercing a fragile silence I'd kept. No hesitation, no second-guessing, just pure, stark acceptance. I saw his eyes flick down to his hands, then back up, searching for some reassurance, some sign that this act would indeed set him free. And in that glance, I recognized a storm of conflicting emotions, relief, fear, guilt, and a flicker of hope, all battling for dominance within him. His shoulders sagged slightly under the burden of what he'd just committed to. The trembling in his voice was now tempered with a quiet resolve, yet I could read the tremors of doubt still lingering. I knew this process wouldn't be easy. It would test him in ways he couldn't yet grasp. That's why I stayed silent for a moment, letting the gravity of his decision settle in the space between us, like a silent acknowledgement of his vulnerability. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a pen, his hand a bit unsteady, as he prepared to sign the document that would transfer his entire fortune. I watched the subtle shake of his fingers, the way his palm pressed against the paper, as if anchoring himself to this moment of truth. The pen met paper, and the ink flowed, an irreversible act sealing his fate as surely as death seals life. I saw the hesitation in his eyes, the flicker of the man he was about to become, a man reborn through loss. As he signed, I couldn't help but think about the layers of his psyche unraveling, the masks of power slipping away in the flow of ink. I wondered what kind of man would emerge from this act, what his soul would look like on the other side of surrender. Was he feeling lighter, or was the weight of his conscience pressing down harder than ever? He leaned back slightly, gazing at the papers now completed. A mixture of awe and fear etched into every pore of his face. His lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. Instead, his eyes fixed on mine, searching for some form of validation, some sign that he'd done the right thing. I offered him a gentle nod, an unspoken affirmation that his journey was only beginning. The act of giving away his riches wasn't just about the money. It was about freeing himself from the grip of greed that had chained him for so long. In that quiet, suspended moment, I saw the faintest glimmer of relief flicker in his eyes, yet it was quickly overshadowed by a shadow of doubt. I knew he'd carry this act with him forever, like a mark of both loss and liberation. I had guided him to this edge, but he was the one who had to leap into the unknown, into a space where trust in himself and in the universe would determine everything. I kept my focus on him, feeling a deep sense of accomplishment, yet also an awareness of the road ahead. The real work was just beginning, a journey inward that required more than just money to heal. It demanded confronting his fears, embracing vulnerability, and trusting that, in letting go, he would find a new kind of wealth, one that no amount of money could buy. As he looked away, seemingly lost in thought, I knew that this act, this sacrifice, was a seed planted deep within his fractured soul. The ripples from this moment would spread out, touching every corner of his life, reshaping him into something new. I stayed silent, knowing that sometimes the most powerful words are the ones unspoken. The universe had just received an extraordinary gift, an invitation to show him that freedom begins where greed ends, and that real salvation comes from within. I could feel the silent tension hanging heavily between us, a tangible force pressing down on the room's otherwise still air. I knew that beneath his outward veneer of confidence, a storm was brewing, an internal clash between greed and an unspoken longing for redemption. As I watched him, I understood that this moment was more than a symbolic act. It was an emotional surgery, a deliberate incision into the fabric of his ego and pride. I reached out, gently resting my hand atop his trembling fingers, and with a calm yet firm voice I said, "Today, we cut away what binds you to your past. Not just your money, but the illusion of control it gives you." His eyes darted away briefly, searching for an anchor, a reason to stay tethered to his old self. I saw the flicker of resistance, the split second when he questioned whether he could truly let go. "Think of this as shedding a layer of armor," I continued. "An armor built from greed, fear, and denial. We're not just relinquishing wealth. We're releasing the weight that has kept you imprisoned for so long." I could see the hesitation simmering beneath his surface, a silent scream for permission to surrender. I took a deep breath, grounding myself in the certainty that this was exactly what he needed. I knew the human heart is a fragile thing, tender and easily shattered, and that sometimes the most profound healing only begins when we are willing to tear ourselves open. This act would be a surgical removal, a conscious cut into the collective ego that had sustained him. But I also understood that the real work lay beyond this moment. As I reached into my satchel, I pulled out a simple, unassuming box, nothing ornate, but charged with significance. It symbolized a vessel for his transformation. I placed it gently in front of him, inviting him to step into the role of the surgeon, the one who would cut away the unhealthy attachments. "Lay your fears here," I said softly, "and trust that what you're about to do is the first step toward genuine liberation." His hand hovered above the box, trembling, and I saw in his eyes a flicker of resolve ignite. The silence stretched, thick and expectant, until he finally nodded, slow and deliberate. In that shared stillness, I watched him reach out, and with a trembling hand pick up a pen. The act of signing over his entire fortune was now inevitable. His signature was a hesitant stroke, a symbol of surrender, a declaration that he was willing to confront the emptiness that wealth had failed to fill. I could sense his internal battle, his ego protesting, yet his soul reaching for something more authentic. As the papers signed, a quiet surge of relief seemed to ripple through him. I saw his shoulders loosen, the tight grip of possession loosen just enough for a breath of genuine space to enter. This wasn't just about giving away his money. It was a declaration that he was willing to shatter the illusion of security he had clung to for so long. Once completed, I gently closed the box, sealing his past within it. The symbolic surgery was done, the chains of ego and pride cut free, leaving behind a raw, vulnerable man. I knew that the true healing had only just begun, an internal journey that demanded him to face his shadows, embrace humility and trust in the process of rebirth. I watched him sit back, eyes unfocused, as if he were already drifting into a new realm of existence. I didn't speak. Sometimes words are mere distractions at moments like this. Instead, I allowed silence to envelop us, knowing that the deepest transformation often resides in what is left unsaid. As he slowly looked up, a quiet acknowledgement passed between us, the understanding that he had crossed a threshold. The act of donation was no longer just a symbolic gesture. It was a ritual of liberation, a surgical act that severed the roots of greed and pride, making space for humility and authenticity to flourish. In that moment, I felt a profound sense of fulfillment, not because I had convinced him, but because I had helped him see that the real wealth lay not in possessions, but in the courage to let go. That true salvation, I believed, begins when we release our grip on what we think defines us and step into the unknown with trust and vulnerability. And as he sat there, amidst the remnants of his former self, I knew this was only the beginning. The real work, the healing, was about to unfold. But for now, he had taken the first brave step, and that was enough. As I watched the subtle shift in his demeanor, I felt a quiet surge of hope ripple through me. The act of giving away everything, his entire fortune, wasn't just a gesture, it was a profound surrender. I knew that beneath his hardened exterior, he was grappling with a storm of doubts, shame, and perhaps a flicker of genuine longing for redemption. I leaned forward slightly, my voice calm but unwavering. "This isn't about losing your wealth," I explained softly. "It's about releasing the chains that tie you to your ego, to your past. Wealth can be a prison or a liberation. You choose." I saw his lips part as if the words had caught him off guard, yet he didn't speak. Instead, he looked down, eyes tracing the shadows cast by the dim light in the room. I watched as a tremor coursed through his body, a physical manifestation of the internal upheaval. His hand, which had once clung to power, now trembled as he reached for a pen. The paper in front of him felt like a gateway, an artifact of transformation. I could sense that he understood the gravity of this moment, that he recognized it as the turning point, the point of no return. The silence between us grew thick, heavy with unspoken truths. I kept my gaze steady, allowing him to process what was happening. I knew that the act of surrender was one of the most difficult things for a person like him, so deeply conditioned to believe that worth equates with possessions. But I also knew that real change often begins with discomfort, with vulnerability. He hesitated for a moment, then began to sign the document. Each stroke of the pen felt like a crack in the armor he had built around himself. I saw a flicker of relief, or perhaps relief masked as hesitation, pass across his face. I understood that this was more than just a donation. It was a symbolic release of the past, a cleansing of the corrupt roots that had fed his ego for so long. As he finished, I reached out and gently placed my hand on his. His skin was warm, trembling beneath my touch. I looked into his eyes, trying to communicate silently that he was free now, free from the shackles of greed, pride, and deception. This moment was sacred, a silent prayer in action. Then I watched him sit back, visibly exhausted yet strangely lighter. His shoulders, once burdened by guilt and secrecy, now bore the weight of something new, an unspoken hope, a fragile trust in the possibility of redemption. I felt a surge of quiet pride, knowing that I had guided him to this point, not through coercion but through gentle truth. As I sat back, a sense of calm washed over me. I felt a renewed belief that healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about transforming it, about turning shame into strength. I wondered if he sensed the same, if he felt the subtle shift within himself, a quiet awakening to a different way of being. From this moment on, I knew the real work would begin. The internal journey that would test his resolve, that would demand he confront every shadow he had long concealed. But that was for tomorrow. Today he had taken the first step, an act of pure courage, and that was enough for now. I found myself quietly hopeful, convinced that the true miracle was not in the act of giving, but in the willingness to change. I believed that real salvation lies in the surrender of attachment, in trusting that what we let go of is making space for something greater. And as I watched him, I realized that sometimes the most profound transformation happens in the silence after the storm, when words no longer matter and only the truth remains. The room seemed to breathe with us, filled with the unspoken promise of renewal. I closed my eyes briefly, holding on to that feeling, the hope that this moment, humble and quiet as it was, marked the dawn of something authentic. For him, for me, for the possibility that even the deepest wounds can become the seeds of rebirth. As I watched him sit there, a flicker of doubt crept into my mind. Was this truly the path to liberation, or just an illusion I was selling? I studied his face carefully, noting how the lines deepened around his eyes, how his fingers trembled slightly as they rested on the polished surface of the table. Every twitch, every flicker of his gaze seemed to whisper of a war within, between his insatiable hunger for power and a faint, almost fragile longing for redemption. I knew this moment was critical. The idea of giving away everything, his entire fortune, was radical, even brutal in its simplicity. Yet I believed in its profound truth. I had seen countless people cling to their attachments, convinced that their salvation depended on what they accumulated or retained. But I also knew that true change begins when we let go, when we release the chains that tether us to our past misdeeds and greed. A part of me wondered if he would comprehend the magnitude of what I was asking. I could sense the internal tug-of-war, his mind racing, weighing the costs against the supposed benefits. I saw a flash of something: fear. Regret? Hope? I couldn't tell for sure, but I sensed that beneath his surface a tiny crack had formed. Perhaps the first crack of many, or perhaps just the aftermath of a fleeting illusion. I leaned forward slightly, my voice calm but earnest. "This is not about punishment, nor about sacrifice for its own sake," I told him. "It's about freedom. Freedom from the shackles of greed that have controlled you for so long. Only when you relinquish what you hold most tightly can you truly see what remains. Yourself, unburdened and authentic." My words floated in the air, heavy with conviction, each syllable designed to pierce through the fog of his denial. His eyes darted away briefly, then back to mine, searching for answers in the depths of my gaze. I felt a flicker of anticipation, an understanding that perhaps he was sensing this moment might be a turning point. Or maybe he was just trying to convince himself that this was still an impossible task, that he could cling to his riches and still find peace. I wondered silently if the wealth had become more than just money. It had become his identity, his armor, his prison. He hesitated, then finally spoke, voice gravelly and thick with emotion. "And if I do this, if I give everything away, what's left?" His question hung in the air, trembling with uncertainty, as if he feared the answer might strip away not just his money, but his very sense of self. I grasped that fear, recognizing it as the core of his turmoil. I paused, choosing my words carefully. "What's left is everything you've been avoiding. It's the truth of who you are beneath the mask of power and corruption. It's the chance to rebuild, without the weight of the past dragging you down. Sometimes the greatest act of courage is to surrender what we believe defines us, so we can discover what truly does." For a moment, he looked away again, eyes fixed on some distant point, and I wondered if he saw the ghost of his former self, someone unburdened, unmasked, alive with possibilities, or perhaps he saw only the abyss that awaited beyond his walls of gold. I could feel the tension stretching between us, thick and palpable, as though the universe itself were holding its breath. I thought about the countless times I had watched people cling desperately to their possessions, their grudges, their illusions of control. I knew the truth, that none of it is permanent, that attachment is a prison we willingly walk into, and yet the process of letting go is never easy. It's messy, it's painful, but I also knew that in that pain there's a seed of awakening. I examined his face again, searching for some sign of genuine understanding. Was this superficial? An act of rebellion against his inner guilt, or could it be real? I had seen enough to know that change, true change, is rarely neat or immediate. It's a slow unraveling, a dismantling of layers built over years, sometimes decades. I reached out, placing my hand gently over his. "This isn't a test of your strength or a punishment," I said softly. "It's the beginning of your liberation. When you strip yourself of your possessions, you strip away the illusion that they define you. What remains, your essence, your soul, can finally breathe freely." He looked down, silent for a long moment, then whispered, "And if I do this, if I surrender everything, am I truly free or just starting a new prison?" I smiled faintly, feeling the weight of his question. Sometimes the only way out of one prison is to walk through the door into the unknown. Freedom isn't about escaping. It's about embracing what is real, no matter how uncomfortable it might be at first. His lips pressed together as he absorbed my words, his mind visibly wrestling with the enormity of the act I had asked of him. I saw a flicker of resolve, perhaps a glimmer of the man he might become if he truly let go. Or perhaps just a fleeting shadow of hope, fragile and tentative. I sat back, letting silence settle between us. I wondered if this moment was enough, a seed planted in the fertile ground of his consciousness, or if it would merely fade, lost in the noise of his old life. I knew the journey ahead would be long, fraught with doubt and temptation, but I also knew that sometimes the smallest step is enough to ignite the possibility of transformation. In that quiet, I made a silent vow that I would be there, guiding him, witnessing his unraveling and his rebirth, because I believed that true salvation isn't in the external acts alone, but in the internal surrender, the willingness to face oneself fully, and to accept that the greatest freedom comes when we relinquish our illusions of control. And so, I watched him, waiting for what would come next, knowing deep down that this moment, humble and raw as it was, might be the beginning of something genuine. I leaned forward slightly, my gaze steady, knowing that what I was about to suggest would cut deeper than any confession or plea could. I could see the flicker of resistance in his eyes, a brief flash of denial that wanted to scream, "This is too much." But I also caught the tremor of something else, a faint whisper of understanding, or perhaps surrender. I told him softly but firmly that sometimes the most profound healing requires the most brutal surgery, that no amount of therapy, no new policies or public apologies could truly free him from himself until he faced the raw, unfiltered pain of letting go. I described it as an emotional incision, an open wound that, although painful, was necessary to remove the malignant tumor of greed that had taken root so deeply within him. His face betrayed a flicker of recognition, but also fear. I watched the muscles tighten, the jaw clench as if every nerve was alert for an escape route. I could feel the weight of his inner conflict pressing down on him, the battle between his old self and the man he could become. I knew this was the moment of truth. I had to be careful not to push too hard, to respect the limits of his resilience. But I also knew that sometimes the only way to heal a fractured soul was to expose it to the pain that had been avoided for years. This wasn't about punishment. It was about the harsh reality of truth, the kind that leaves no room for denial. I explained that the surgery was voluntary, that I could guide him through the process, but that he had to be willing to feel every searing moment. I painted a picture of the aftermath, of a man stripped bare without the armor of wealth, power, or deception. The person who remained would be raw, fragile, perhaps even unrecognizable at first. But in that vulnerability, there would be an immense strength, an honesty that could finally set him free. He hesitated, breathing unevenly, as if the very thought of relinquishing his riches was a death sentence. Yet within that hesitation, I saw a seed of something new, an ember stubbornly refusing to be extinguished. I reached out mentally, offering reassurance without words. knowing that the true cure wasn't in what I said, but in the trust he would place in himself to undergo this emotional surgery. I told him that pain is a necessary part of growth, that the incision might sting worse than any betrayal, but that healing often begins only when we accept the wound. I reminded him that the greatest suffering comes from clinging to illusions, from denying the truth that his wealth had become a cage, and that the only way to break free was to confront that pain head-on. As I watched his expression shift, I realized I was witnessing a pivotal moment, a choice between remaining a prisoner of his own making or becoming the architect of his liberation. This was the moment where I, as a psychologist, could only guide and hope that he would choose to face the raw, unrelenting truth, because I knew that on the other side of that pain lay the possibility of rebirth. I felt the silence deepen, the air thick with unspoken fears. I wondered if he sensed that I was asking him to surrender everything, his pride, his illusions, his wealth, to forge a new self. A self unburdened by the chains of greed and corruption. It was a risky proposition, but I believed that sometimes the greatest healing comes from the most painful surgeries. In my mind, I repeated the metaphor, an emotional operation that could either save or destroy. I hoped he would understand that the pain was temporary, a necessary step in the journey toward genuine freedom. That the real cure was not external, but internal, a complete overhaul of the mind and soul. I stayed still, watching him grapple with the decision, knowing that this was the defining moment. My role was to hold space for his suffering, to remind him that the pain was a sign of life, of change. That true healing often required the courage to feel the hurt, to confront the deepest wounds of the ego. As he finally nodded, a faint sign of acceptance, I felt a quiet sense of relief. I knew this was just the beginning. The real work would be in the days ahead, in the slow, deliberate process of recovery. But for now, I saw him standing at the threshold, ready, perhaps, to undergo the necessary pain of transformation, knowing that beyond the hurt lay a possibility he had long denied, to truly be free. I watch his eyes, trying to decipher whether the flicker I see is resignation or a spark of something else, perhaps a fragile hope I dare to believe is genuine. As I sit there, I feel the weight of what I've asked him to consider sinking deeper into his consciousness. Giving away his entire fortune isn't just a financial act. It's a symbolic surrender of the corrupt life he's built around power, greed, and deception. It's an act that strips him bare, exposing every lie he's told himself. I lean forward slightly, the silence between us stretching so thin I could hear the faint hum of the city outside. I let it hang, this silence, as I watched the minute shifts in his face, muscles tightening, eyes darting, then settling, as if he's trying to piece together the impossible. I see the flicker of doubt, but also an undeniable glimmer of recognition. Perhaps he senses that I am not just asking him to part with money, but to confront his own reflection, to face the darkness he's kept hidden behind walls of wealth and influence. You see, I begin softly, true freedom isn't out there in the bank accounts or the political titles. It's in the relinquishing of everything that keeps you chained to who you've been. You've built your empire on secrets, on manipulation, on theft, each dollar a testament to your past betrayals. But what if I told you that your salvation lies in letting go, in giving away what you've hoarded for so long? His lips part, and I catch a glimpse of a tremor, perhaps of fear, perhaps of longing. His shoulders hunch slightly, as if trying to protect himself from the uncomfortable truth. I watch him struggle, and I realize that this moment is a crossroads, not just for him, but for me as well. I've seen many walk this path, tread this line between denial and acceptance, but rarely have I witnessed such raw vulnerability in someone so deeply entrenched in corruption. I quietly remind myself that I am here not to judge, but to guide, to hold space for this immense internal upheaval. I recall that I've always believed that the most profound healing begins when we confront our deepest truths. To do that, we must surrender the false sense of security that wealth and power provide. We must relinquish the illusions we cling to, no matter how fiercely they define us. He shifts again, and I see a flicker of resolve, or perhaps merely the flicker of necessity. His gaze drops briefly to his trembling hands, then meets mine with a new awareness, an acknowledgement that his world is crumbling, and perhaps that's what needs to happen. I see the internal battle raging within him, the desire to cling to his old self, versus the faint hope of becoming something more genuine, more whole. I decide to push a little further, knowing that sometimes the hardest part is not the asking but the waiting for the moment when the mind finally surrenders. "What's left?" I whisper. "When you strip away everything you've accumulated, who are you without your wealth, your influence, your lies?" He hesitates, then finally nods, a slow, deliberate movement that feels like the first breath of fresh air after being submerged underwater. The relief I feel is subtle but profound. I recognize that this is only the beginning, that the real journey lies ahead, one paved with self-doubt, remorse, but also the possibility of redemption. As I prepare to guide him through this arduous process of self-questioning, I am conscious of the delicate balance I must maintain to help him see the truth without overwhelming him, to gently peel back the layers of his ego, exposing the vulnerability beneath, without crushing him under the weight of shame. His face bears the marks of this internal upheaval, a map of his struggles and silent acknowledgements. I see in his eyes a flicker of clarity, a small ember of understanding that perhaps, just perhaps, the greatest transformation comes from within. I know that his path to true freedom will be long and arduous, but I also know that once he accepts the necessity of surrendering everything, a new chapter can begin. I rise slowly, signaling that our session is coming to a close, but my mind stays with him. I hold on to the hope that this moment of truth is the seed from which genuine change will grow. That the man sitting before me, fractured and fragile, will find the strength to face his own reflection, to question everything he thought he knew, and to embrace the painful but liberating process of becoming truly free. As I watched the silent battle unfold behind his eyes, I felt a strange calm settle within me. I knew that what I was asking of him was monumental, perhaps even impossible in his current state of denial and greed. Yet I believed, and still believe, that true change begins with the acknowledgement of one's own brokenness. I leaned forward slightly, my voice soft but unwavering. "You see, the only way to wash away the weight of your sins is to give them away. Every last penny, every secret, every lie etched into your fortune." He stared at me, as if I had just spoken in a language only he could understand, the corners of his mouth trembling. His chest rose and fell in shallow breaths, a signal of the internal war raging within him. I saw that flicker of doubt, that tiny ember threatening to be snuffed out by years of justifications and self-deception. I pressed on. "Your empire of corruption, your amassed power, none of it will free you. It's a prison, built by your own hand, brick by brick, dollar by dollar." His eyes darted away for a moment, and I could almost feel the flickering of his conscience trying to surface. It was fragile, barely perceptible, but I clung to it like a lifeline. I reached out with my words, knowing that the truth often hits hardest when it's delivered gently. "Imagine the relief, the liberation. If you let go of this burden, you might think you're losing everything, but in reality you're shedding the chains that have bound you for so long. Your salvation isn't in holding tighter, it's in surrendering everything you've accumulated." His hands clenched into fists on his lap, as if trying to physically hold on to his last shreds of control. I saw the flicker of resistance, the instinct to deny what I was suggesting, but also the faintest hint of curiosity, an opening I dared not ignore. "It's not about the money," I continued. "It's about what that money represents: power, influence, control. But those are illusions, fleeting and hollow. When you give away your entire fortune, you're not losing. You're finally removing the facade, exposing your true self beneath the mask of greed." The room fell into a thick silence, heavy with unspoken thoughts. I let it linger, knowing that sometimes silence is more powerful than words. I knew he was grappling with the idea, weighing the risks and the potential rewards of such a radical act. I saw a flash of something else, fear, yes, but also a hint of hope. Because hope, I've learned, often blooms in the soil of desperation. I sat back watching him process, feeling a quiet sense of anticipation. This wasn't a quick fix. No change like this takes time, patience, and relentless honesty. I was simply the catalyst, planting the seed of a possibility that, if nurtured, could someday grow into genuine freedom. As I prepared to end the session, I offered what I believed was the most potent truth I could give him. Remember, the act of surrender is the most courageous step you can take. It's not a sign of weakness, but of strength. It demands a willingness to confront the chaos within, and to accept that sometimes The only way forward is to let go of everything you cling to. That's where true liberation begins. I saw the faintest tremor in his jaw, a sign that my words had penetrated the armor built around his conscience. I knew I couldn't force him, nor did I want to. My role was to guide, to hold space for his inevitable awakening. I stood slowly, signaling the end of our time, but my mind remained rooted in the hope that this moment, this fragile breath of truth, would be the first step on a long, uncertain journey. I left him with one last thought, knowing that what I had just shared was only the beginning. The real challenge was yet to come, whether he could summon the courage, the humility, and the unwavering will to surrender not just his wealth, but the illusion of control that had held him captive for so long. Walking out of the room, I felt a quiet sense of responsibility settle within me. I knew that tomorrow he might wrestle with the shadows of doubt again, or perhaps he would begin to see the glimmer of a new path. Whatever the outcome, I was reminded that sometimes the greatest act of healing is simply holding space for someone willing to face their own darkness, and trusting that, within that darkness, the seed of transformation quietly waits to be uncovered. I step out into the cool air, my gaze drifting over the sprawling horizon, where the sky kisses the earth in a muted tapestry of blues and grays. My mind lingers on the man I just left behind, a symbol of the tangled web of greed and denial that so many cling to, myself included, until today. I feel the quiet hum of my purpose settle deep within, a steady reminder that my role isn't merely to diagnose, but to ignite a spark of awakening, even in the most hardened of souls. As I walk away, the weight of the moment presses on my chest, but not with heaviness, more like a cautious optimism. I have witnessed the trembling edges of his resistance, the flicker of doubt that dawned when I dared to challenge his fortress of justification,